Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, a look at today's Ashcroft confirmation vote and other early days of the Bush presidency, with a Kwame Holman report and the views of 4 editorial page editors. Then 2 takes on prescription drugs, the Washington politics, and the effect on pharmacies. Plus an interview with the new president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It all follows our summary of the news this Thursday.
This program was also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to PBS stations from viewers like you. Thank you.
The Senate confirmed John Ashcroft to be Attorney General today. The vote was 58 to 42. 8 Democrats joined all 50 Republicans in voting for him. Most Democrats objected to Ashcroft over his opposition to abortion and gun control, among other issues. Republicans welcomed today's outcome, but lamented the way Ashcroft was treated.
The best thing for America is for John Ashcroft to prove his critics wrong, for him to become an Attorney General who clearly will enforce and administer the laws of the United States fairly and with the sort of equanimity which we expect of a man of his stature and his position. And that, I think, will be the best legacy of this investigation. I am sure it was painful for John Ashcroft. It was painful for many of us to stand in judgment of our former colleague, but it was our constitutional responsibility.
I call it the onward trashing soldiers routine, and it only happens every once in a while, but it is degrading to the Senate. And not everybody on the other side was part of the onward trashing soldiers routine, but there were a significant number, and I was very disappointed in them. Will we get along better afterwards? Yeah, because we're big people, and we'll gradually put this behind us, but it was disgusting.
Late today, Ashcroft was sworn in by Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas in a private ceremony. We'll have more on the Ashcroft vote right after this news summary. In India today, international rescue teams began to abandon the search for survivors of last week's earthquake, and bulldozers started leveling shattered buildings. The confirmed death toll stood at more than 14,000, with more than 60,000 injured. Relief aid poured in, but people in remote villages complained they were still not receiving vital supplies. A Libyan man acquitted in the Pan Am bombing trial returned home today. He was freed, Wednesday by a special court in the Netherlands. A second Libyan was convicted in the 1988 bombing over Lockerbie, Scotland. We have a report from Mark Webster of Independent Television News.
Home to a hero's welcome, Alamin Fahim, a man who for months has stood accused of mass murder. With a hug from one of his 5 children, his arrival descended into chaos. Free from the cool deliberation of his court case, he was reunited with family and friends he left behind in Tripoli in April 1999, after he was finally handed over for trial. His acquittal is being widely trumpeted in Tripoli as a vindication of the Libyan regime. But the uncomfortable reality is that Abdel Bassett has been convicted of the murder of 270 people at Lockerbie. Alamin Fahima threw victory signs to bewildered passers-by from his motorcade, as the authorities here insisted the former Libyan Airlines employee had never been an intelligence officer for the Libyan government. Within an hour of arriving, he was greeted by the maverick head of that government, Libyan leader Colonel Gaddafi. Then, as the soldiers tried desperately to push the media back, I asked Colonel Gaddafi repeatedly to answer one question.
Will you now pay compensation, Colonel, to the victims of Lockerbie?
Abdel Bassett is also innocent, he said eventually. The evidence I will give on Monday will prove that he is also innocent. He refused to say what fresh evidence he had or why it hadn't been submitted before. But he had specifically chosen this place for the meeting because it has been preserved as a reminder of a US air raid in 1986.
Prosecutors in the trial had suggested the Pan Am bombing was retaliation for that American attack on Tripoli. The U.S. economy showed more signs of slowing in 2 new reports today. An index of manufacturing activity fell in January to the lowest level in nearly 10 years. It's compiled by the National Association of Purchasing Management. And the Commerce Department said incomes rose 0.4% in December and personal spending rose 0.3%, well below the gains of earlier last year. Consumer spending accounts for 2/3 of all economic activity. President Bush today sent Congress a plan to help the disabled. His New Freedom Initiative would help them gain access to jobs by paying for special computers and other equipment, and it would triple funding for research to help disabled people live independently. Mr. Bush spoke at the White House.
Wherever a door is closed to anyone because of a disability, we must work to open it. Wherever any job or home or means of transportation is unfairly denied because of a disability, we must work to change it. Wherever any barrier stands between you and the full rights and dignity of citizenship, we must work to remove it in the name of simple decency and simple justice.
The president did not say what his plan would cost, but during the campaign he promised to spend $880 million over 5 years to help the disabled. In California today, the state assembly approved a plan to ease the electricity crisis. That outcome reversed a vote taken hours earlier. The $10 billion measure would allow the state to buy and sell electricity for 2 cash-starved utilities. Opponents said it would mean rate increases. The state Senate approved the plan Wednesday. Airline delays hit record levels last year. The Federal Aviation Administration reported today that 450,000 flights were late, up 20% from 1999. Bad weather was the main cause, but airport congestion and the growing number of flights were also factors. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the first days of the Bush administration, including the views of 4 editorial page editors, reports on the politics and the pharmacy perspective of prescription drugs, plus an interview with Congo President Joseph Kabila. Today's Ashcroft vote, a capper to the first days of the Bush administration. Kwame Holman reports.
42 days after President George W. Bush nominated John Ashcroft as Attorney General, a deeply divided Senate finally confirmed him this afternoon. Senators sounded weary, yet confident of better days to come.
I've been disappointed by this nominations process through the Judiciary Committee and to a degree here, although less so on the floor of the Senate. I thought that the rhetoric did get too hot. It did get, I thought, into a range of being unfair, inaccurate even. But I don't think we should let that permanently alter the atmosphere that we have tried to set here in the Senate.
There are some scars left on the initial days of the presidency of George Bush, who had campaigned on a campaign of inclusiveness, bringing people together, and this nomination clearly did not do that. But again, most of the president's other moves, this nomination notwithstanding, have been bipartisan moves, and hopefully, while this is clearly a setback to that bringing people together, to that bipartisanship, it's not going to be a permanent one.
The clerk will call the roll.
The negative reaction to Bush's nomination of a staunch conservative for the Justice Department was the exception among his cabinet choices. Largely, his selections to help him run the government were well received as worthy of his long-standing pledge to work toward bipartisanship. Most were approved quickly, even unanimously, by the Senate. President Bush started his first week in office with a nod to conservatives that angered abortion rights advocates. He ended U.S. funding for international aid groups that provide abortion services. After that, he highlighted bipartisan initiatives, including an education plan that downplayed spending public dollars on private schools through vouchers, a provision strongly opposed by Democrats. The education effort also helped inaugurate what's quickly become a Bush trademark in just 2 weeks as president, bringing in leaders from both parties who have an interest in a particular issue.
I'm so honored that the senators came over and members of the House, the leadership, that's going to help carry legislation. I believe the best way for Vice President and I to To help the legislative process is to discuss issues in a frank and open way. And that's the beginning of a process here. So thank you all for coming.
One of the Senate's most liberal voices, Massachusetts' Edward Kennedy, appeared impressed after the meeting.
As one who participated in there for close to an hour, the areas in which he pointed out and where we are agreement, I thought were very substantial and are out there and can make a very important difference.
This week, the president hosted a multiracial group of clergy to promote his plan to help faith-based organizations that want to deliver social services. He also announced his plan to help poor seniors pay their prescription drug bills, a concept favored by majorities in both parties in Congress, and capped off the week with today's proposal to help the disabled. In just 12 days, President Bush has met with more than 100 members of Congress, about half of them Democrats. Emerging from one such encounter last week, Senate leaders from both parties offered favorable assessments of the Bush approach.
He really has been reaching out. I believe he noted that this is the 6th meeting in 2 days that he has had with congressional leaders in one group or another. And while he might not want to continue at that pace, it's a very positive sign, and I think it's appreciated by members of both houses and both parties of the Congress.
I thought it was a very constructive meeting. Obviously, the more we have opportunities like this to talk about issues of mutual concern, the more productive I think the relationship between Congress and the President, between Democrats and Republicans, will be.
However, one of President Bush's biggest challenges is reaching out to blacks. Last night, the president held a long meeting with members of the Congressional Black Caucus.
I look forward to a good dialogue on subjects that are on the members' minds and on my mind as well.
Mr. Bush got only a tiny percentage of the African-American vote, and many still are angry about the disproportionate impact of Florida's voting problems on blacks.
One of our main concerns was bringing to him the pain that so many people are feeling about the election. And we expressed to him the fact that one of his major concerns early on was to heal the country. And we reminded him that part of the problem was that it did not seem that there was a strong commitment with regard to addressing the problem which came up in the election in Florida. And we spent quite a bit of time with regard to Mr. Ashcroft. What was said there was that we are vehemently against Mr. Ashcroft's appointment because we believe that his policies in the past, his actions, not only as a senator, but as an attorney general and as a governor, have flown in the face of the concerns of our constituents and so many people that the president claims he wants to help bring about this healing. I think we are clear that the jury is still out.
Fresh from the Ashcroft confirmation, the president plans to drop in on a retreat of the entire House Democratic caucus in Pennsylvania this weekend.
Margaret Warner has more.
For a further assessment of the Ashcroft confirmation and the beginning of the new Bush presidency, we turn to 4 editorial page editors: Patrick McGuigan of the Daily Oklahoman, Susan Albright of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, Rochelle Cohen of the Boston Herald, and Frank Burgos of the Philadelphia Daily News. Pat McGuigan, beginning with you, the Ashcroft confirmation, big victory for this new presidency?
Of course. The president had to endure a lot more obstacles, if you will, on this nomination than President Clinton did on his Attorney General nominee. In fact, Janet Reno, even though she was quite liberal and inexperienced, got unanimous confirmation, 98-0. John Ashcroft gained a 58-42 confirmation, even though he was quite experienced, prepared for the job, but conservative, and that was the principal objection to him. But he's there. He's on the job.
Susan Albright, how do you see it in terms of both the process, but also whether this is a plus for this new administration?
Yes, it's a qualified plus, I would say. He certainly won, and that is good. But he also was subjected to a lot of criticism, and I think there are really 2 messages that came out of that process. One is that even the Democrats are willing to give the new president a little bit of free rein, even on a nomination that they disagree with, many of them. but two, that they can muster votes against someone, and I think it's a signal for when he might be naming nominees for the Supreme Court, for example.
Rochelle Cohen, how do you what is the process by which he was confirmed, and the fact that he did make it finally, though a lot of Democrats voted against him? What does it say to you about this new presidency?
Well, I agree completely that this wasn't entirely about the Ashcroft nomination. The Ashcroft nomination was also about the Supreme Court and upcoming Supreme Court nominations. And it doesn't necessarily bode well that the Democrats were indeed able to muster that magic number. They proved what they needed to prove, which is that they can marshal a filibuster against any future nominee, Supreme Court nominee in this anticipated case, if they so chose, especially if it's someone of the conservative leanings of an Ashcroft. So yes, he got through, and he got through in reasonably short order, certainly compared to the Clinton debacle with Zoe Baird and Kimba Wood. And, but the Democrats also proved their case, that they've got an awful lot of clout and they have their agenda.
So Frank Burgos, on balance, was this a smart choice, do you think, of President Bush to choose John Ashcroft?
Well, what would have been a very smooth transition, I think, or a very successful one, has hit a bump here. They were only able to get 8 Democrats over to their side in confirming John Ashcroft. And one of the Democrats, Chris Todd, it was a very muted endorsement. It was basically saying, I'm not going to do to John Ashcroft what the Republicans have been doing to our nominees for the last 8 years. So I would imagine that the Bush administration is celebrating right now, but it must be a very muted celebration.
Pat McGuigan, what about that point that it is a bump in the road, or that it did sort of fly in the face of this reaching out and this bipartisanship and this new tone that the president said he was bringing to Washington, and by many accounts he's been quite successful at in many ways?
I think he's made an excellent start. In fact, I'd probably give him a B+ so far. What George Bush is showing is that you can be civil and be conservative. Now, this is not a remarkable proposition to people who have watched him perform in Texas, nor is it a remarkable idea to conservatives in general, but apparently this is regarded as a concept, I think somewhat facetiously, there in the nation's capital. George Bush has made a good start. He kept faith with a key constituency by picking a strong, clear, committed, principled conservative as his Attorney General. The man has been confirmed by the Senate, and I believe he'll make an outstanding member of the President's team.
So Susan Albright, do you see this reaching out as simply a matter of style, or do you also see substance? Do you see a flexibility on the President's part in substance ways, on priorities?
So far, I would say we have not seen much in the way of policies. Most of it has been rhetorical. In other words, his inauguration speech was quite good. Our page complimented him on it. But in terms of content, the only thing I would point to that I think shows some movement would be his backing off from vouchers somewhat, and instead moving toward deductions or credits for private education. So I think the jury is out on that. I don't see a whole lot of movement in terms of being bipartisan in a policy sense.
But Rochelle Cohen, there's been a lot of comment here in Washington that if you look at the issues he chose to focus on, they're all issues that you think Democrats would focus on: education, charities, albeit faith-based charities, prescription drugs for seniors. I mean, how do you read all that?
Well, I think here is a politician. Imagine this, a politician who campaigned on a set of issues and who is now actually rolling them out one by one. I really couldn't disagree more with Susan. I think we've seen a remarkable 2 weeks. The education plan really is out there, and it's quite comprehensive. And when you get someone like our own Senator Ted Kennedy saying, I may disagree with the Ashcroft nomination, but there is an awful lot to be said. We have a tremendous commonality of interest on something like the education proposal, I think that speaks well not just to the Bush priorities, but to the Bush priorities as they relate to this reaching out effort. I think you'll see some of the same things come to bear on prescription drugs. This may not end up as the Bush prescription drug plan, but I think he has certainly set the agenda on that issue, and he is playing both to his own constituency and to the pressing need of Democratic politicians who are also looking for some developments on things like education and prescription drugs.
Frank Burgos, what do you make of the way he's put out these proposals and the fact that on all three of them he's hinted, well, this is my idea, but I'm willing to listen to others? How do you read that?
Well, he's just facing reality. I mean, let's look at the sort of big things that have happened over the last 2 weeks. On prescription drugs, he's getting a tepid response from Congress. Education package, he's realizing now that there are some key Republicans and Republican supporters who don't like vouchers, don't like the idea of inner city kids going to big suburban schools, and realizing that there are Republicans out in the rural areas who suddenly realize that vouchers aren't going to help them because they don't have private, schools to go to. On energy, California gave them an opportunity to take a real activist or a really good stance there. And basically what he told California is what Ford told New York, drop dead, you're on your own. So in terms of substance, I would have to give President Bush for the first 2 weeks just a C grade. In terms of style, though, it's been a B. We've had guys who've been waiting to get into the White House for 8 years. So it's not surprising that you've got very experienced people coming in there and managing a very, very smooth transition.
Pat McGuigan, what do you make of the style question or his leadership qualities? And I know 2 weeks is awfully soon, but again, there are a lot of comments from people on the Hill about, boy, I got there for the meeting and the meeting actually started early, and there are a lot of comparisons that are being made.
Well, Margaret, I think several things. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is this is a guy who, when he became governor in Texas, inherited a pretty difficult situation in the legislature, dealt mostly with Democrats, and to some extent, that's still true. The Democrats have a very strong presence in the legislature. Like many of the other majority of American governors who are Republican, he's dealt with an eclectic mix of issues, and education has been a top priority for him. So it's no surprise that just as he promised in the campaign, that's one of his key initial policy thrusts. I give Bush not only good marks for style, but also for substance. And I find some of the dismissive remarks about his education package in particular kind of surprising, because this is a very solid set of proposals with broad support, and his commitment on vouchers is to have a mechanism that's real to force accountability into the public system. I think it's laudable. I think he's put it off a little too long in terms of the trigger date being 6 years instead of earlier.
Susan Albright, it sounds as if some of your colleagues disagree with you here about how much heft there is to all of this.
Well, I think it's paying off very well for him that he has chosen establishment, experienced people to work with him. There's no question that this transition has been much cleaner, much neater than the last ones that Clinton had. And so I think he's done fine in many ways. And I think a lot of it does remain to be seen. Take, for example, the new initiative he has on faith-based and other community people taking over some of the social services. Our paper is not editorially inalterably opposed to this by any means, but it all kind of depends on where he goes with it. In the past, when we've had religious groups giving social services, they've followed clear guidelines under which they're not actually preaching or trying to convert or using the religion in the treatment of drug addiction or whatever itself. President Bush seems to have some interest in moving that line and in going to a kind of system in which perhaps the religious message is part of the treatment. So I think a lot of it depends on where the proposals go. I think that's true in education, in the tax cuts, and so forth.
So Rochelle Cohen, back to the new president himself, does he strike you as a person who's going to be able to not just roll out these ideas, but really make them happen, given the division of power in this city now?
Well, and that's where the issue of style and symbolism comes in. And there is a lot to be said for his efforts to reach out. Tonight, for example, Senator Ted Kennedy and other members of the Kennedy clan are going to be munching popcorn in the White House screening room, watching 13 Days. This may not be a great effort to bring one of the most liberal members of the U.S. Senate into line on a whole variety of issues on which there may or may not be agreement. But the style points, the symbolism of reaching out to the Kennedys in general, to other liberal members of the Senate, I think speaks well of the man and of his efforts to get a program through. A similar effort with members of the Black Caucus on Capitol Hill, and with a number of black ministers with whom he's already met. This is what he needs to do. He knows that. He knows the margin in the Senate for his party is whisker thin and dependent on the continued good health of Senator Strom Thurmond, 98 years old. So he is making an effort to reach out, and I think he's doing a darn good job of it so far.
All right, well, thank you all four very much.
Thank you, Margaret.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, 2 reports on prescription drugs, the changing politics, and the shortage of pharmacists, plus an interview with the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Prescription drugs politics. Susan Denser of our Health Unit reports the unit is a partnership with the Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation.
While running for office last year, President Bush had to tackle the topic of Medicare and the fact that the federal health program for the aged and disabled doesn't pay for most prescription drugs used outside the hospital.
Medicare does more than meet the needs of our elderly. It reflects the values of our society. We will set it on firm financial ground and make prescription drugs available and affordable for every senior who needs them.
Earlier this week, the president began to follow through on that pledge by submitting the outlines of his drug coverage proposal to Congress.
I was informing the chairman that today we're sending up to the Hill our immediate helping hand proposal, which is help for prescription drugs for seniors.
But the president has found little interest from either party in passing his plan. It's a temporary measure to channel money to the states so they can help low-income seniors buy prescription drugs. Senators discussed it at a recent confirmation hearing for incoming Health and Human Services Secretary Tommy Thompson.
You know, there's just not much support. You know, my governor doesn't like it. Other governors don't like it.
I think the concern is if we have a temporary program, we may never get any more on prescription drug because of the, difficulty and the complexity of those issues.
Although many seniors have at least some drug coverage through private insurance plans, about 15 million of Medicare's 40 million beneficiaries have none at all. President Bush says he ultimately wants to address that as part of a comprehensive Medicare reform. That would not only add a drug benefit, but would also dramatically restructure the program. But that would take time and would be politically difficult. So Bush wants to start with a drug plan for the worst-off seniors that he calls an immediate helping hand.
We will modernize Medicare, but we will not wait to help seniors afford prescription drugs. We will give them direct aid now by expanding and funding state assistance programs. For 4 years during the transition to better Medicare coverage, we will provide $12 billion a year in direct aid to low-income seniors in all 50 states.
Under the president's plan, states could use that $12 billion a year for so-called pharmaceutical assistance programs for the low-income aged and disabled. The state programs would pick up the entire cost of prescription drugs for the lowest income seniors and a portion of the costs for others.
Every senior with an income less of $11,300, $15,200 for a couple, will have the entire cost of their prescription drugs covered. For seniors with incomes less than $14,600 or $19,700 per couple, there will be a partial subsidy.
Other provisions of the president's plan would help up to several thousand seniors who spend more than $6,000 a year out of pocket on drugs. Bush's proposal builds on programs now in place in 14 states and scheduled to begin soon in 5 more. Together, the programs currently offer help with drug costs to an estimated 800,000 of the aged and disabled. But 31 states don't have such programs, and many are leery of setting them up. Robert Reischauer is president of the Urban Institute, a Washington think tank.
It's a very complex undertaking, and if this program really is going to last only 4 years, the states would have to expend a lot of energy designing, implementing, and administering a program that would quickly disappear. But of more concern to the states is that the program may not disappear after 4 years, that Congress and the President may not agree on long-term Medicare reforms, and they would therefore be having a permanent responsibility for drug assistance to the elderly and disabled. They would get increasingly pressured by middle class and upper middle class people without drug assistance, saying, why are only the poor getting this?
Although most Democrats in Congress oppose the immediate Helping Hand plan, they're also split over the broader issue of reforming Medicare. Some are wary of efforts to revamp the program and mainly want to focus on adding a drug benefit for all enrollees.
The president's proposal, I think, is a great leap sideways. I mean, many people, just because you make $16,000 a year or $20,000 a year, or a little bit over that as a couple, doesn't mean with the prescription drug costs as they are that you can afford it. The whole point of this is to make it part of Medicare, to make it universal, and to meet the need.
Other Democrats, like Senator John Breaux of Louisiana, support adding a universal benefit through overall Medicare reform. They fear that the Helping Hand proposal would be a time-consuming distraction.
I want to do this as quickly as we possibly can, and convinced now that the best way to do it is to do it as part of Medicare reform.
At a meeting this week with top GOP health lawmakers, the president took note of the resistance to his plan.
If in fact what they're saying is that they plan on expediting a Medicare reform that will include prescription drugs for all seniors, then all of a sudden I begin to say, well, gosh, that may make sense that you look at our proposal the way you do. If they're going to drag their feet, if the members of the Congress on both sides of the aisle don't feel the same urgency that I feel and these two chairmen feel on Medicare reform, then I feel very, very important for us to have an immediate helping hand. There are a lot of seniors who need help when it comes to prescription drugs.
And with at least a few Republicans voicing some tepid support for the program, the debate over prescription drug coverage could begin in earnest soon as Congress starts work on the next fiscal year's budget.
Now the prescription drug story as seen at the pharmacy. Ted Robbins of KUAT Tucson reports.
Meet your new pharmacist. It doesn't have much personality, but it doesn't complain about the hours either. Pharmacy robots, like this one at the Phoenix Veterans Hospital, are the latest alternative to human pharmacists, who are in seriously short supply. Take Walgreens. The nation's largest drugstore chain says it alone will need 3,000 new pharmacists every year for the next decade. Over the last decade, Walgreens doubled the number of its stores. In the coming 10 years, it plans to double again. That means it will have to at least double or triple its pharmacists to keep offering such perks as 24-hour drive-through windows.
Not forget your receipt.
The law requires that every open pharmacy have at least one licensed pharmacist behind the counter.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Nicole Littell began working at Walgreens after she graduated from college. She's now pharmacy manager at this store, and she's seen the demand for her services explode along with the Phoenix area population.
Prescriptions are ready for James Simmons. You know, it does get difficult. There are a lot of times where pharmacists, work a few hours at one store and have to go to another store to help out.
The labor shortage is causing salaries to skyrocket.
I mean, I never dreamed I'd be making this much money at a young, this young of an age.
28 years old, Nicole Littell is making $79,000 a year plus cash bonuses and company stock. Some new recruits may get even more.
I've heard, anywhere from $5,000 up to $25,000 sign-on bonuses. I've heard some pharmacists are being offered, BMWs. Some are being offered houses.
The National Association of Chain Drugstores says retail pharmacies in the U.S. currently have about 7,000 openings. The nation's pharmacy schools will graduate a little more than 8,000 new pharmacists this academic year. That would solve the problem, except only 5,000 or 60% of those graduates will work in traditional pharmacies. University of Arizona student Nicole Povich says she can get better hours and make even more money doing research at a drug company or managing patient benefits at a health maintenance organization.
Because in a retail setting, you start real high, but you tend to sort of stay in that sort of realm. There's not a lot of advancement unless you change your position.
Fred Pavala is Assistant Surgeon General and Chief Pharmacist of the U.S. Public Health Service.
There are so many opportunities for pharmacists today. Academia, the pharmaceutical manufacturers industry, the insurance companies, the pharmacy benefit managers. It's almost unlimited where you see pharmacists can go these days.
The demand for pharmacists follows a vicious demographic circle created by the increased use of prescription drugs. Those drugs help people live longer and healthier lives, and the longer people live, the more drugs they take.
The longer lasting of the disease requires us to manage it not 4 or 5 years until death, but for 20 to 25 years until death.
J. Lyle Bootman is Dean of the College of Pharmacy at the University of Arizona and former president of the American Pharmaceutical Association. This year, he says doctors will write the equivalent of 12 prescriptions for every person in the United States.
Estimates today are 2.8 to 3 billion prescriptions annually. It's estimated by the year 2004, 2005, certainly in excess of 4 billion prescriptions. That's a tremendous percentage increase with only probably an increase in 4 to 5% of the workforce.
Drug companies aggressively market to doctors and to patients. In 1997, the federal government relaxed rules on marketing prescription drugs on TV. You've probably seen commercials like this one from Shearing Plow for the best-selling allergy medicine Claritin.
Claritin has a low occurrence of side effects, such as headache, drowsiness, fatigue, and dry mouth, similar to sugar pill. Talk to your doctor about Claritin soon.
Americans are doing just that, asking their doctors for prescriptions and getting them. A lot of people don't think twice, since many insurance plans pay most of the cost.
Have you step over in that window? Pharmacists go over with you.
Pharmacists say their role is the same as it's been for decades, accurately filling prescriptions and counseling patients on taking medication.
2 puffs 4 times a day, and one of the ingredients in there can make you a little jittery sometimes.
Today, though, many pharmacists spend just as much time, maybe even more, dealing with medical insurance companies.
The patient comes in with the simple prescription. For some technical reason or some error, the computer says, well, this person's not eligible to receive this medication. The patient says, well, of course I'm eligible. I just went to the doctor. I belong to my insurance plan X. Your computer must be wrong. And so then a series of phone calls have to take place. People are estimating this is occupying the pharmacist's time to as high as 60% of the day.
Experts like Bootman worry about the toll paperwork and overwork are taking on pharmacists and potentially on patient safety. A report last year from the National Institute of Medicine estimated that mistakes are made on about 4% of the nation's prescriptions. That's 120 million mistakes a year.
Right now, many places are finding that pharmacists are working under stress. And when you're working under stress and you don't have enough people to fill the prescriptions that are out there, it is going to be tough on them. They're going to make mistakes and errors.
Millions of people are also self-medicating with herbs and over-the-counter drugs. That presents additional danger to a patient and a busy pharmacist unless the customer speaks up.
So it's a two-way street, though. The pharmacist has to be sure to ask the patient, but the patient needs to let us know also when they're taking something over the counter or added an herb to their medication regimen.
If a pharmacist is not willing to take the time with you to explain those things, then I would go to another pharmacy and find the pharmacist that is willing to sit down and talk to you.
The pharmacy industry is doing a number of things to alleviate the shortage. The pharmacist still has responsibility for prescription accuracy, but technicians like this woman now assist them by serving customers and making calls to doctors and insurance companies.
We can give them a call.
Can you do that?
Yes.
And then there's the robot pharmacist. This one automatically fills single-dose prescriptions for hospital patients. It cost $1 million, but Phoenix VA Hospital Chief Pharmacist Michael Gump says it's worth it. The pharmacy stays open round the clock, and the robot prevents mistakes.
Everything that leaves our inpatient pharmacy is bar-coded. So from the time the physician puts the order into the computer, till it's picked, till it's administered to the patient, it's all barcode driven. And the final end of that is the nurse on the floor has a barcode device, assuring that the right patient's getting the right medication and the right dose at the right time.
The hospital hopes to install a robot in its outpatient pharmacy next year. A number of mail-order pharmacies are using them as well. Several new pharmacy schools are scheduled to open in the next few years, and many existing schools are expanding their enrollment. The University of Arizona, for instance, where this student is doing research, will expand from its current 60 graduates to 70 graduates next year. National polls consistently rate the pharmacy profession near the top in honesty and ethics. To stay that way, the pharmacy industry has to creatively confront a demanding mix of aging customers, expanded benefits, and more products. In the meantime, customers may just have to be patient while the industry's solutions take effect.
Finally tonight, a new African leader, Antoine Suarez.
Moi, Joseph Kabila, Président de la République démocratique du Congo.
Joseph Kabila succeeded his father as president of Africa's third-largest country last Friday, just days after Laurent Kabila was shot to death by a bodyguard. The younger Kabila inherited a nation on the verge of economic and political collapse, cut almost in half by civil war. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is at the center of a multi-nation conflict called by some Africa's World War. The eastern part of the country is controlled by rebels and troops from Uganda and Rwanda. In the west, Zimbabwe, Angola, and Namibia have been supporting the Kabila regime. President Joseph Kabila is 29 years old and a major general. He was in command of the army when he was chosen quickly by his father's cabinet to take over the presidency. As a youth, he spent much of his life in exile in Tanzania and Uganda, where he received extensive military training. Since his swearing in last week, both the Congolese government and its rebel opposition have expressed interest in reviving a 1999 peace accord signed by the elder Kabila. It's since been widely ignored by all sides in the conflict. UN officials have approved but not dispatched peacekeepers to the Congo to implement what are called the Lusaka Accords. Joseph Kabila is now on his first diplomatic trip to enlist support for his new government. Yesterday, he met with French President Jacques Chirac, and today he began a two-day visit to the United States. This morning, President Kabila attended a prayer breakfast with President Bush here in Washington, and later met with Secretary of State Powell and other administration officials. Also in Washington for the prayer breakfast was Kabila's neighbor and rival, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda. Kagame met yesterday with Secretary Powell, and there had been speculation Kagame and Kabila would meet today. Tomorrow, President Kabila is scheduled to meet privately with members of the UN Security Council in New York. I spoke with him earlier this afternoon. Mr. President, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
If we were to step outside of this hotel and talk to ordinary Americans, what could you tell them about why it's important for this country to be interested in the future of the Congo, in its security, in its prosperity, and its continued existence as one state?
First of all, I'd say America is a nation, a strong nation, because it has stayed a united nation. since the last 200 years. I don't see why the Congo today must be a nation that everybody, or anybody for that matter, should start thinking of dividing.
So it's in America's interest to have a healthy Congo?
It's in America's interest to have a healthy Congo. It's in the interest of Africa to have a Congo that's stable and strong.
Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, is also in Washington this week. He was an ally of your late father. Now he is an opponent of your government. Might you speak with him while you're both in Washington, or both in the United States?
I don't see anything wrong with speaking to President Kagame. I don't really see anything wrong in speaking to President Kagame, but of course, the problem is not speaking with President Kagame. The problem is the occupation of the Congo, which has to be ended. We might speak, but the reality is that the occupation is still in progress for the last 3 years now.
The armies that are occupying eastern Congo have as their goal the ending of your government's rule from Kinshasa. You might say that one of the reasons they still are there is because your father and you are still in power. Why would they go home now? What is it that has changed since last year that would make them go home?
Precisely. I don't believe that either government of Rwanda, Uganda, or whatever has got the right to decide who has to be in power in Kinshasa, because the Congo is not in a position, neither is it interested in deciding who should be in power in Uganda or Rwanda or Burundi for that matter. We are a sovereign state. We'd like to stay so.
Why didn't the agreement signed in Zambia result in peace?
Precisely, that's why I say we are stuck with the Lusaka Peace Accord, because there are lots of ambiguities, contradictions within the accord itself. But of course, on the other hand, I believe it's lack of goodwill on the part of the aggressors, whose intentions are to stay in the Congo, continue with the rape of the resources, continue occupying the Congo for their selfish ends, and that's why we are stuck with the Lusaka Peace Accord. That's why up to today.
When you say stuck, are there parts of it that you would like to renegotiate? Are there parts of it that are forcing your country to do things that you don't want to?
Forcing to do things that we don't want to is not really the word I could use. But I believe it's something that has to be renegotiated. It was signed in July 1999, up to today, almost 2 years. I mean, it's just obvious that there are clauses that have to be reviewed.
Can your government start making moves now, even though there are parts of the country that are under occupation, to improve the lives of the Congolese? Are you so distracted by the war that it's very hard to worry about things like water, transportation, the telephone system?
Well, of course, Congo, as you know, has had a very rough ride for the last 32 or so years. There are lots of development that we need to do as far as transportation is concerned, hospitals, water, power, etc. But of course, all those sectors need resources.
Would you want to remain president for several years, or do you see your time in the office as part of a transition to a more permanent government?
The most important thing that I can do for my country is to see an end to this war. Talking about my political future is not really, I don't believe that it's the time to discuss that. But the most important thing that I'd like to see happen in the Congo is, under my presidency, is to see an end to the war, a transition to a democratic government. The future for me, time will tell.
But so you would like to begin to move the country to elections?
I mean, we have to move forward. But when we talk of elections, I mean, we are talking of elections in what circumstances? We've got a country under occupation. How do we go ahead with elections?
Well, would the opposition be able to participate in these elections, for instance?
Of course, the opposition can participate in the elections. But when I'm talking of the occupation of half of the country, will the opposition participate in the elections where Rwanda and Uganda control the country? That's the big puzzle. Not really a puzzle, but I've been stating wherever I've gone. In Paris, I said the same thing. For us, the priority is to see the foreign armies of Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi move out of the Congo. The Congolese dialogue will start tomorrow, the day after that. It's in preparation. And then the nation will move forward to a transition with elections, democratic elections, that will be observed by the whole international community.
If on the other side of that occupation line, they say, well, that's fine, President Kabila, but we would only participate if the other foreign armies, the Namibians, the Zimbabweans, and the Angolans also leave. Is a comprehensive peace going to have to be part of the deal, not just the Burundians and the Rwandans?
That's why we are talking of the inter-Congolese dialogue. That's the forum where we'll find the base for whatever is going to happen in the next 2-3 months, 6 months.
You've mentioned that your country has had a rough ride. Certainly, there are many difficult challenges ahead. Are you optimistic?
I have all the reasons to be optimistic. I believe the future is bright for the Congo if all the Congolese people will take this opportunity, sit down, talk to each other, but of course, the occupation must end in order for the Congolese people to do that in perfect harmony with each other, not being forced by any foreign power, be it Uganda or Rwanda.
Are you nervous? Are you overwhelmed by the duty that's just been given to you? You are still a young man. You were not involved in the political life, and now here you are, president of the country. Is it still a shock?
It's not a shock. It's a challenge that I believe I'm up to that challenge. It's a challenge.
Mr. President, thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Again, the major stories of this Thursday. The Senate confirmed John Ashcroft to be Attorney General. The vote was 58-42. 8 Democrats joined all 50 Republicans to back the nomination. And international rescue teams ended the search for survivors in the Indian earthquake. The confirmed death toll now stands at more than 14,000. Before we go, an editor's note. Last night, in his report on municipal energy, Spencer Michaels said a consumer using a private company would pay 56% more than one using municipal power. Wrong. He would pay 124% more. He and we regret the error. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening with Shields and G Go, among others. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
The biggest obstacle to feeding the world is not the food supply, it's just politics. Who is dedicated to opening the borders to get food to the people who need it?
Helping people with estate planning so that those they care about get more than a simple will can provide. See how we earn it. Solomon Smith Barney.
This program was also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to PBS stations from viewers like you. Thank you. Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.